It's hard to believe I've ended up in a scenario like this. It was an unexpected twist. One I had never envisioned or contemplated. Yet life has a way of unfolding in surprising directions. It began on a typical afternoon. The sort that ought to slip into the recesses of memory without a moment's reflection. Yet that day lingered in my mind. That day transformed everything. The residence was serene, with only the gentle murmur of the air conditioning and the sporadic song of birds filtering in from outside. I had just completed the task of tidying the kitchen when I sensed a gaze upon me. Not fleeting, but lingering and purposeful. As I pivoted, I found him there, framed in the doorway, my stepson, Tyler. Tyler had consistently exhibited politeness and respect, embodying the qualities of a young man who naturally held doors open and expressed gratitude without needing encouragement. Yet recently, there was an unmistakable shift in the way he gazed at me. Initially, I dismissed it as inconsequential. At 22, he was traversing the delicate balance between youth and the responsibilities of adulthood. Still seeking his place in the world. He had always shared a strong bond with his father. But since his dad began traveling more for work, he found himself spending more time in my company. I was indifferent. I appreciated the company, yet this felt distinct. His gaze was anything but casual, it was direct and focused. As if he were attempting to decipher my thoughts. Anticipating my reaction, a warmth surged within me. An unsettling yet exhilarating sensation all at once. "Is there something you require?" I inquired, maintaining a calm tone. He paused briefly, then slowly shook his head. "No, just reflecting, contemplating." Concerning what topic? I might have inquired, yet I was already aware of the response. Perhaps, in some small way, I longed to hear it spoken aloud. Instead, I redirected my attention to the sink, concentrating on the soapy water spiraling down the drain. The evening's dinner was unremarkable, or at least it ought to have been. The television flickered softly in the background as I sat opposite Tyler at the dining table. I inquired about his courses and what he intends to do over the summer. He responded, yet there was an undertone in his voice, a subtle sharpness that was not typically present. There was a certain intensity in his gaze, as if he were anticipating a moment, a chance to seize. Later that night, after I had ascended the stairs, a knock echoed at my bedroom door. The hour had grown late, far too late for idle chatter. I paused before revealing it, my breath hitching a bit at the sight of him standing there. He appeared as though he had words on the tip of his tongue, yet hesitated to find the right way to begin. He ran a hand through his hair. Lost in thought, I find myself at a loss for direction. I hadn't either, yet I sensed we were teetering on the brink of something significant. A boundary we were meant to respect, but one that was beginning to fade away. "Tyler," I said with caution, "this isn't." "I know," he interrupted. "However, that doesn't alter the situation. Does it?" His words lingered in the air, dense and electric. I ought to have taken a step back, closed the door, and put a stop to whatever was unfolding before it even began. Yet, I remained in my place, observing him, anticipating. "Good night," he finally murmured, his voice softer now, as if he had arrived at a quiet understanding. He turned and walked away, leaving me there, my heart racing. I shut the door, yet slumber eluded me that night. I found myself wide awake, gazing at the ceiling, lost in thoughts of the expression in his eyes and the strain in his voice. It was incorrect. It was perilous. It was an occurrence I should have never permitted. And still, I sensed that this was far from finished. Far from it. The following morning, I arose with the distinct sensation that I had hardly rested at all. The events of the previous night replayed incessantly in my thoughts, and I couldn't dispel the sense that an unchangeable transformation had occurred between us. I navigated my morning routine with a sense of normalcy, clinging to the hope that by acting as if nothing had transpired, it would fade away into the annals of the past. As I descended the stairs and caught sight of Tyler in the kitchen, a realization washed over me. I had been mistaken. He leaned against the counter, a coffee mug cradled in his hands, observing me with the same intensity I had sensed the previous night. "Morning," he remarked nonchalantly, as if everything remained the same. "Good morning," I replied, mustering a smile. I moved with intention as I poured a cup of coffee, mindful to avoid his gaze for too long. If I revealed too much, if I allowed him to glimpse the tumultuous thoughts within me, I feared I might never reclaim them. I lingered at the table, wishing that perhaps by maintaining my distance, the palpable tension might dissipate. Yet Tyler remained. Instead, he positioned himself opposite me, savoring each deliberate sip of his coffee. "It seems you had a restless night," he finally remarked. I glanced up suddenly, my heart racing. "What leads you to that conclusion?" "I noticed the sounds of your movements. It seemed you were awake into the night." He was observing me once more, that familiar probing gaze that sent a flutter of unease through my stomach. I compelled myself to maintain composure, to ensure my tone remained buoyant. "I've been struggling to find my focus. Everything seems normal." He took his time to respond. Instead, he inclined his body forward, placing his mug gently on the surface. Did I cause this? There it stood, the inquiry I had been fearing, the one that could draw me deeper into this perilous realm if I didn't tread carefully. "Tyler, we must tread carefully," I remarked, my tone unwavering even as my hands tightened in my lap. "I understand that things seem to have changed recently. But it's not just a feeling, they truly are different." He interjected. I took a deep breath. "That doesn't imply we must take action on it." He observed me intently for a prolonged moment, and in a fleeting instant, I entertained the notion that perhaps this would mark the conclusion of it all. Perhaps he would acknowledge it, express his understanding, and we could return to how things used to be. He rose to his feet, each movement measured and intentional. As he made his way around the table in my direction, my breath hitched as he rested a hand on the back of my chair, his presence so near that I could sense his warmth enveloping me. "Surely, you can't be serious about that, can you?" he whispered softly. My heart raced within me. I knew I should have halted this, should have risen and created space between us. Yet I remained still. I was unable to. He extended his hand, the slightest touch of his fingers grazing my arm, and I sensed a change in the atmosphere around us. "Tyler," I whispered, my voice scarcely rising above a murmur. He lingered, his gaze fixed on me, anticipating my signal to proceed. In a single, heart-pounding instant, the desire surged within me. The creak of the front door swung open, breaking the stillness of the moment. I flinched as my husband entered the house, placing his briefcase down with a weary sigh. "Hey, darling," he called. I apologize for my delayed response. The traffic was unbearable. I sprang from my seat, adrenaline coursing through me. "You've returned home quite early." He approached with a smile, leaning in to kiss my cheek, completely unaware of the tempest that had just unfolded around us. "The meetings concluded sooner than anticipated. I wanted to catch you off guard." "That's lovely," I persevered, mustering a smile. Tyler had departed, his face a mask of inscrutability. Yet the gravity of what nearly transpired between us lingered in the air. I convinced myself it was trivial, that I wouldn't allow this to escalate any further. Yet, as I stood there with my husband just a few feet away, I felt an undeniable certainty that this was not the end. Far from it. I dedicated the remainder of that evening to steering clear of Tyler. Whenever his eyes met mine, it was as if my husband could peer into my very soul. Sensing the burden of what had nearly transpired etched upon my features, I immersed myself in the kitchen, feigning deep concentration as I chopped vegetables, stirred sauces, and engaged in any task that kept my hands busy. Tyler's presence enveloped the room, a palpable energy that held my focus captive, his gaze unwaveringly fixed on me. The evening meal unfolded in serene silence. My husband, unaware of the charged atmosphere surrounding us, was engrossed in discussing his meetings, the challenges he faced at work, and his weekend plans. Tyler remained quiet, offering only brief replies as he absent-mindedly maneuvered his fork across the food on his plate. I was just as flawed. Thoughts surged through my mind, while my body remained taut. Every nerve tingled with the awareness of his presence. Mere inches away at the table, after dinner, my husband sank into the couch, weary from his long day, aimlessly flipping through channels on the television. I slipped away to the kitchen, feigning a need to tidy up, but in truth, I was merely attempting to collect my scattered thoughts. As solitude enveloped me, I exhaled slowly, my fingers clutching the edge of the counter. I craved space, time, and clarity, yet none of those were afforded to me. I sensed his presence before his voice reached my ears. Tyler's presence was undeniable, the slight change in the atmosphere causing a tingling sensation along my spine. I remained still, yet I sensed his presence looming just behind me. "We need to have a conversation," he murmured gently. "Not now," I murmured in response, my grip on the dish towel growing firmer. "So, when will that be?" His voice lingered in the air, deep and unwavering, almost uncomfortably near. "Less than text, this cannot occur," I murmured, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper. "It was an error, and we should move on from it." "You can't possibly think that," he replied, moving in closer. "I can see it reflected in your gaze." I closed my eyes, summoning the resolve to distance myself from him, to halt whatever this was before it could deepen. As I opened my eyes and turned to him, the words became lodged in my throat. His expression was inscrutable, yet his eyes conveyed a profound intensity, a hint of peril, an unspoken challenge. "Tyler." A sound emanating from the living room caused us to halt in our tracks. My husband chuckled at something on the television, blissfully oblivious to the events happening just a few feet from him. The enchantment shattered, and I breathed out unsteadily, retreating a step. "It's time for you to go to bed," I insisted with conviction. "This dialogue has reached its conclusion." He paused, his jaw clenched, yet after a lengthy silence, he finally gave a nod. In silence, he pivoted and strode away, vanishing into the shadows of the staircase. I rested against the counter, my heart racing. I had brought it to a close. I had set a boundary. Yet, beneath the surface, I realized that boundary had begun to fade the instant I allowed myself to consider the possibility of something greater. The subsequent days were steeped in an oppressive atmosphere of unease. Tyler lingered in the background, a steady reminder of the close call that had almost unfolded. The tension lingered, unbroken by his insistence, yet the quiet enveloped us, heavy with all that remained unsaid. That Friday, my husband departed for yet another business trip, planting a gentle kiss on my cheek before stepping out the door. "Suitcase in tow. Reach out if you require assistance," he said, his smile radiating warmth. I nodded, managing to conjure a smile. "I shall. Stay safe." As soon as the door clicked shut, I exhaled a breath I hadn't known I was holding. And then, I sensed it, the burden of an observer's gaze. I pivoted, and there he stood, at the base of the staircase. Tyler. Silence spoke volumes, his presence alone conveyed everything needed. The quiet lingered in the air, heavy with the unspoken truths that we both hesitated to voice. In that instant, I realized I was teetering on the brink of an irreversible choice. Uncertain whether I truly wished to halt my descent. The absence of my husband made the house feel transformed. The atmosphere was hushed, the stillness heavy with expectation. I was aware that Tyler remained in the house, yet he had not uttered a single word since my husband departed that morning. The atmosphere between us had intensified, a silent yet unmistakable presence, hovering around us like an invisible thread drawing me nearer to a desire I understood I ought to resist. I occupied myself with trivial activities, wishing that diversions would soften the thoughts sneaking into my consciousness. I tidied the counters, organized the spice rack, and even folded laundry that was perfectly fine as it was. Yet, my thoughts remained irresistibly drawn to him. The clock chimed 12, and it dawned on me that I hadn't caught a glimpse of Tyler all morning. Had he departed? Was he steering clear of me? A blend of relief and disappointment lingered in my chest. I dismissed the thought, reprimanding myself for giving it any weight. I required some distance, a moment to gather my thoughts before making a decision I might regret. I entered the living room and settled onto the couch, seeking a bit of television to provide a welcome distraction. Just as I was about to grab the remote, I caught the sound of footsteps approaching from the stairs. I shifted my gaze, and there he stood. Tyler lingered at the bottom step, observing me intently. He appeared lost in contemplation, his hands poised on the banister, as if weighing the decision to approach. My heart raced. I couldn't help but voice my thoughts, though I instantly wished I had kept them to myself. "I believed that was your desire," he responded, his tone steady and inscrutable. I took a deep breath. I find myself at a loss, unsure of what is unfolding between us. He advanced with purpose, his demeanor steady yet intentional. I believe you do. I let out a quick breath, my fingers clenching in my lap. Tyler, this isn't possible. Why not? He cut in. His voice carried a gentle strength, and his gaze was unwavering, fixed on me. You continue to act as if it doesn't affect you, yet I can see right through it. I sense it. I prepared to protest, yet the words eluded me, for he was indeed correct. I sensed it, and refusing to acknowledge it only intensified its presence. He moved closer, and I realized I needed to rise, establish some space, and put an end to whatever was unfolding before it escalated beyond my grasp. Yet I remained still. You're afraid, he remarked, his tone gentler this time, not due to the inherent wrongness, but rather because you're uncertain of your ability to restrain yourself. My breath hitched in my throat. Tyler, just as I was about to complete my thought, he appeared before me, so near that I could sense the heat emanating from his skin. My heart raced wildly within me. I won't do anything you don't desire, he whispered, his eyes steady and resolute. However, it's essential to be truthful with yourself. I shut my eyes, attempting to cast aside the tumult of feelings swirling within me. This transcended mere temptation. It was about the profound bond that had been developing between us. A bond I had endeavored to overlook. As I slowly opened my eyes, I found him still gazing at me, patiently awaiting my reply. I was uncertain if I possessed the courage to provide him with the response he truly warranted. The atmosphere surrounding us was charged with expectation, silence enveloping us, both hesitant to break the stillness. The rhythm of my heartbeat echoed in my ears, rapid and urgent, pounding against my ribs as if it were trying to alert me to the truth I had already grasped. I ought to have taken a step back, to have urged him to go, to let go of whatever had been developing between us. Yet, I remained, my breath shallow, my hands pressing against my thighs as I sought to anchor myself. Tyler continued to observe me, poised for a response, approval, motivation, an indication that my desire matched his. That was the issue at hand. I completed that task, but desire alone couldn't rectify the situation. I rose to my feet, managing a laugh that came out more anxious than relaxed. We're acting absurdly. His jaw clenched subtly, yet he remained steadfast. I can see that you have doubts about it. I took a deep breath. Tyler, this isn't incorrect? He interrupted me before I could complete my thought. It simply feels right. I inhaled sharply, the words lodged in my throat. It wasn't a matter of whether it seemed inappropriate. It revolved around the repercussions, the burden of decisions that could never be undone. I gently shook my head. It holds no significance. It is not possible. He let out a breath through his nostrils, his face a mask of mystery. For what felt like an eternity, he remained silent, unmoving, his gaze fixed on me with a level of patience that sent my stomach into a whirlwind of anxiety. Then, as if reaching a conclusion, he took a step back. All right, I blinked, the distance between us feeling overwhelming, achingly vacant. All right? He nodded, his expression inscrutable. If you truly think we should overlook this, that it holds no significance, then I will let it go. I shall refrain from mentioning it once more. Relief ought to have enveloped me. I ought to have felt a sense of relief, comforted by the fact that he was offering me a way out, a chance to break free from something I had no right to consider. Yet, what I experienced was merely an emptiness deep within my heart. I offered a deliberate nod, pushing aside the disappointment coiling within me. That's for the greater good. A fleeting expression crossed his face, an elusive emotion I couldn't fully identify. Indeed, he pivoted, making his way to the stairs in silence. I allowed him to continue. I chose not to return his call. I remained rooted in place, observing him fade away, the burden of something unresolved heavy upon my shoulders. After that, the house carried a new essence. The silence that enveloped us was far from mere thickness. It was unfathomable. Tyler maintained a certain distance. Not unkind, not harsh, but just far enough that his absence echoed in every room I entered. I convinced myself that this was my desire, that this was the correct decision. Yet, each time I noticed him gazing at me from across the room, that same inscrutable look in his eyes, I found myself questioning whether what was right truly aligned with what was bearable. The subsequent days passed in a hush, an unsettling stillness enveloping everything. Tyler honored his promise. He chose not to revisit the topic, refrained from pressing further, and maintained all boundaries. Yet the atmosphere surrounding us was electric, heavy with all that lingered unspoken. I ought to have experienced a sense of relief, perhaps even a touch of gratitude, that he had chosen to step back. Yet, what I experienced was something altogether different, a sensation that disturbed me far more than the remorse I had anticipated. I overlooked it. I longed for the intensity of his stare, the way he pushed me to confront the truth rather than escape from it. The absence of his presence made the house feel even more hollow. The minutes dragged on, and I discovered myself in a state of anticipation, anticipating an event I had long convinced myself was impossible. I immersed myself in diversions. I found myself venturing out more frequently, attending to tasks that really didn't require my attention, searching for excuses to escape the solitude of my own mind. During my time at home, I filled my days with various tasks, preparing intricate dishes that went unrequested, seeking to engage both my hands and thoughts. Yet, nothing seemed to make a difference. Despite my efforts to mask it, the reality was undeniable. I desired him, realizing that he had released his grip, that he had chosen to cease the struggle, did not bring any comfort. It only exacerbated the situation. At this moment, I found myself pondering the possibilities of what could be. I found myself battling the temptation to breach the boundary I had established with such conviction. Late one evening, after a day filled with our mutual avoidance, I heard footsteps echoing in the hallway. In the kitchen, I stood at the sink, scrubbing dishes, attempting to immerse myself in the soothing cadence of water rather than the unease swirling within me. As I pivoted, he appeared, framed in the doorway. I stood still, clutching the rim of the sink. "Is there an issue?" My voice remained calm, yet my heart raced uncontrollably. "No," he said, his expression a mystery. "I was under the impression that you might have finished evading me." I took a deep breath. "I'm not trying to evade you." He raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "So, is that the reason you've hardly spoken to me for days?" I returned my attention to the sink, concentrating on scrubbing the plate in my grasp. Despite its already pristine condition, I believe this is the most prudent choice. "Are you?" He entered the kitchen, drawing nearer, not too near, yet close enough for me to sense the warmth of his presence. "It certainly appears otherwise." I shut off the tap and let out a slow breath before turning to him. "Tyler, we had a mutual understanding." "No," he interjected seamlessly. "You consented. I simply chose not to contest it." I sealed my lips, fingers clutching the counter's edge tightly. "Isn't that identical?" "Far from it." He examined me, his eyes deliberate and scrutinizing. "You expect me to pretend that everything is fine. But we both understand the truth beneath the surface." A chill coursed through me. Yet I stood resolute. "That doesn't imply we need to take any action regarding it." He moved in a little closer, allowing me to catch the challenge flickering in his eyes, the frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "So, what's keeping you here?" I parted my lips, yet silence enveloped me, for there was no response that wouldn't dismantle it all. He inclined his head just a bit, pausing, offering me one final opportunity to reject him. However, I refrained, and that was precisely the response he sought. The silence lingered in the air, a palpable tension enveloping us. As we remained still, each hesitant to disrupt the fragile stillness with even the slightest breath. The intensity of his gaze was palpable, lingering on me, challenging me to falter first. Perhaps I had done so already. Perhaps I had been unraveling for some time, fragment by fragment, until all that remained was the unavoidable. I had the option to turn away, to shove him aside, to terminate the moment before it could ever begin to grow. However, I did not. Instead, I remained rooted in place, my heart racing, breaths coming in quick gasps, anticipating his words, any words that might compel me to confront a choice I wasn't prepared to face. "You don't want me to walk away," he finally said, his voice low yet resolute. I took a deep breath, my fingers gripping the edge of the counter tightly. "Tyler, this isn't, don't claim it's incorrect," he cut in. "I can see that you have doubts about it." I let out a quick breath, shutting my eyes for just a moment. "My beliefs hold no significance. What is right holds significance." He moved nearer, the distance between us diminishing to nearly zero. Does this not sit right with you? I remained silent, as we were both aware of the reality. It did not. It seemed unavoidable, as if it had been on the horizon for ages. Regardless of my attempts to reject it. Then cease the charade, he whispered. His words sent a chill coursing through me. My determination began to falter, drifting away from me like grains of sand. The atmosphere was charged with an exhilarating tension, a hint of peril, and I realized, in that instant, that the boundaries we once established had vanished entirely. Tell me to leave, he said, his voice now a gentle whisper. Indeed, I shall. I gazed at him, truly gazed at him, and for the first time in weeks, I permitted myself to recognize what had been developing between us. The atmosphere crackled with intensity, punctuated by fleeting looks and the rapid thump of my heart whenever he was close. Everything was present, unmistakable and inescapable. Yet, the words eluded me. I found myself unable to ask him to go, as the thought of his departure was something I couldn't bear, and that was precisely the response he sought. The instant I chose not to ask him to go, I realized I had overstepped my boundaries. The tension between us was palpable. It enveloped us completely, a relentless force that devoured everything in its path before we had a chance to intervene. My heart raced at the sensation of his presence, nearer than it had ever been, yet still lingering in anticipation, continuing to offer me the opportunity to reconsider. However, I would refrain from doing so. I was unable to. Tyler's breath flowed evenly, his hands resting calmly at his sides. The warmth emanated from him, my skin tingling with the realization that this was the pivotal moment. The instant when everything shifted. I took a step back, creating just enough distance for space to linger between us, yet not enough to dissolve the palpable tension. We can't return from this, I murmured, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper. I prefer not to. His response came swiftly and confidently. And in that moment, the final strand of my defiance broke. I had devoted too much time to feigning, too much time battling against something that had already established itself. All the justifications, all the rational arguments against this, fell apart beneath the force of the undeniable connection we shared. I had persuaded myself that steering clear of him, disregarding the intensity of his gaze, would suffice to make it all fade into oblivion. Yet, I had been deceiving myself. Tyler stepped closer, his fingers brushing against my arm, his touch delicate, as if he were anticipating my rejection. However, I chose not to. Instead, I tilted my head, my gaze probing his, aware that the instant I shifted, the instant I surrendered, there would be no return. And then, I took the plunge. The world faded into a haze, reason slipping away like sand through my grasp. And for the first time in ages, I ceased to ponder, ceased to analyze, ceased to worry about what lay ahead. Time seemed to flow in a new rhythm after that. Moments faded into days, and days transformed into something altogether different. The desire within me was insatiable, compelling me to seek out reasons to be near him, to share the same air, to inhabit the same space where this unvoiced bond had been quietly brewing for far too long. Yet, the truth has an uncanny ability to seep back in, regardless of your efforts to block it out. It unfolded on a serene Sunday afternoon. As the house remained hushed and tranquil, my husband came back the previous night, oblivious to the change in the atmosphere, the hidden truth that had taken hold beneath our own roof. He pressed his lips to my cheek before heading out for a round of golf. His touch warm and familiar, yet his presence felt unexpectedly distant. The weight of guilt should have consumed me, should have fractured the delicate reality I had crafted. Yet it failed to do so, and that filled me with a deeper fear than anything I had ever experienced. Tyler occupied the living room as I entered, his expression a mystery, his posture at ease, yet his gaze was keen. He had always possessed an uncanny ability to understand me, and I was aware, without a word spoken, that he felt my inner conflict. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered, the words echoing with a sense of emptiness. Lacking strength, he observed me intently for a prolonged moment before nodding. Yet his agreement lacked any sense of finality. The silence lingered, heavy with the unspoken truths that hung in the air between us. I was about to walk away when his voice halted me in my tracks. "Is there any remorse about it?" I ought to have agreed. That moment was my chance to bring it all to a close. To wipe the slate clean before it had the power to ruin everything. Yet, as I glanced his way, my response was unmistakably etched on my features. Negative. He gave a single nod, his jaw clenching. I don't either. And with that, the truth lay between us. Steadfast and undeniable. I have no regrets about it. Not at that time. Perhaps never. Yet, that understanding did little to alleviate the difficulty. Some decisions leave us with unresolved conclusions. Certain decisions linger, shadowing your every move, a constant reminder that once a boundary is crossed, retreat is impossible. Always onward, into the uncharted.